All right, welcome to BK121. It's week 1 of your last practical class of the program. It is a big class, but one that we are going to have lots of fun with, I promise. We are going to be making a complete and full cake weeks 1, weeks 2, and week 3. Then week 4 and 5 is all about prepping for your week 6 final project, which will be a 2-tier wedding cake with gum paste flowers on it. I know that sounds scary, but I promise it's not. I am here to walk you through it. Something else that I want you guys to know is that as an entrepreneur myself, I have gone through many trials and tribulations when it comes to cake. I think that every lesson that there is to learn the hard way, I've done it. It's happened. So I've got plenty of stories to tell you that will hopefully make you feel like you're not alone when things are hard. Plenty of tips to give you to hopefully help you avoid some of the same mistakes that I made. And mostly, I think that in this class, more than any other class that you've had so far, you guys are really going to be able to get to show me your style and the skills that you've crafted these past 15 months. So there's my beginning of class speech. You guys know me. I'm Chef Genevieve. For any of you that haven't met me before, hi, I'm Chef Genevieve. You'll hear my voice constantly in class. I'm a chatterbox. In your feedback, I'm a chatterbox, so you'll hear lots of me. Please know, I know that things right now still are crazy in the world. Ingredients are still scarce in areas. I know that this pandemic for some feels like a breeze, and for some it feels like a tornado, and it's so absolutely hard. So please, 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 I can't say it enough, know that myself, your student success coach, and the rest of the Escoffier staff, we're here for you. So if you have ingredient issues, if you have concerns about leaving, anything that might be an issue, reach out to us, okay? We've got options, we've got solutions, we've got suggestions. Your health and safety is always the priority. So please know that. I know that there were lots of changes during spring break, whether it was gonna be a business class or practical class, but we are here for you to support you and help you to the end. You guys are so close to crossing the finish line that I think that was a big motivator for us. We wanna help you get there on time, scheduled. We don't want your lives to feel put back in every way, shape, and form because of COVID-19. We're gonna beat that. So that's my speech about that. I'm here for you. Literally any concern that you have, bring it to me. We're gonna chat, and I'm gonna be as flexible as possible and work with you however I can. Any questions so far? I know that I was blabbing a lot to begin with. I'm racing through because I wanna get to the good stuff, the meat of the class. All right, the next thing I wanna take a look at, you guys, is our class page. So I'm going to share my screen. You guys know the ropes, so I don't feel like I need to walk through our syllabus with you. The syllabus can be found right here, and just like all the syllabi in your previous courses, it breaks down the percentages of this class. So how much your assignments are worth, your knowledge checks, your discussion forums, your final exam. So make sure you take a look at that. I don't want to waste our short hour of class time with this, but it is important. So just make sure that you take a peek at that so that you're clear on the breakdown of our class. Right underneath is the copy of your book. The book is going to come in handy for this class. I find that especially in week 3 when we're talking about things like chiffon cake and the science of the meringue really, really matters. Pulling up that chapter in the book can be super helpful. So don't forget that that's a resource available to you. Let me clear this. Right here, it says ask your questions here, but I'm sure you've heard this referred to before, and the way that I refer to it is the class cafe. I know that in previous classes, the class cafe was an area for you guys to sort of chat with each other, and I want it to stay that way. But what I want you to know is I'm also going to be popping in. I'm going to check that class cafe every day. So if you found a cool video or you made something that you're especially proud of and you want your classmates to see it, if you thought of an interesting food question, post it here. This is a great area for us to get to know each other and talk more about food in a less restricted way than we are during class. So that's the class cafe. I'm going to be popping in every day. I'd love for you guys to pop in too and for us to have some fun food discussions there. So then looking at our week 1, we've got our field guide, which we're going to walk through together today. I will post one every week or something like it every week. That's a brief description of what to look for what we're talking about this week, okay? Now this first one will include a brief overview of the whole class, just because I like to set you guys up for success. You'll see your same typical reading resources as well as video resources. I have added some of my own additional resources or additional resources that I found. So you'll notice those mixed in as well. This link here, I'm going to continue to add to throughout the block. This very last one, it says extra fun and some challenging videos on piping, baking, and more. In this Google Doc, I have a bunch of cool YouTube videos, things like more advanced versions of a shell border. A shell border is something we're going to work on this week. And I want you guys to see some examples of, once you learn the basics, how it can help you make really, really elevated designs. So there's fun videos. There's also YouTube channels that I really love specific to cake. So fun resources there. If you are feeling bored and have free time and you want to check out some additional fun cake stuff, you can take a look at that link, and I'm going to be adding to it as class goes on. This week, week 1, you've got a knowledge check and a conversion check. That is the case for weeks 1 through 4, I believe. Let's double check together. Week 2, you have both a knowledge check and a conversion check. Week 3, you have both. Week 4, you have both. Then week 5 is just a knowledge check, and week 6 is your final exam. There are 2 discussion forums in this class. One in week 3 and one in week 5. The first one's easy. It's about decorating techniques. Second one is also pretty easy. It's about food costs. I don't want you guys to let you stress that out. I just want you to keep in mind that those are upcoming. So weeks 1 through 4, you have knowledge check and conversion check. Then week 5, it's just a knowledge check. And week 6 is the final. And then discussion forums, you only have 2 in this 6-week class, and that's in week 3 and week 5. I will remind you of that in every live session. Don't worry, I'm not going to let that slip. So we'll stay on top of that together. But again, I just like to give you guys a heads up. Any questions about that so far? All of your knowledge checks and conversion checks, same rule applies as it has in your previous classes, which means your highest grade is the one that counts, and you can take it as many times as you want in the week that it is open. So I know that the questions change up a little bit if you retake it, but I promise that you can get to that 10 out of 10 if you take it a couple of times. I recently started as an online student furthering my degree and have been taking similar exams and quizzes. And sometimes I have to do it 3, 4, 5 times before I get 10 out of 10. But I do it every single time. I do it until I get that 100% because there's not a lot of areas where we get opportunity like that to keep improving our score, to keep learning from the questions. So keep that in mind for your knowledge checks and conversion checks, you guys. If you don't score well, take it again. You can keep taking it. All right, let's see here. We talked syllabus, we talked class cafe. I will post in the class announcements occasionally. This isn't an this isn't an area where you have to respond to me. Usually if I post in the class announcements, it's just something that I want you all to know, a tip or suggestion, something along those lines. If I send you a message, typically I am looking for a response. The best way to contact me, you guys, on our class page, you can see my office hours. Now, I am usually available even outside of these hours. Like if you text me, I'll probably be able to text you back pretty quickly. But it is during these hours that I am super, super available for us to have a Zoom session if you need it, or a phone call, whatever it may be. This is going to be the best time to reach me. On this page, my email is listed and my calling number. In your feedback, and I'll post it on the page as well. I'll also include my texting phone number because texting is a really convenient way, especially on the weekends, to get a hold of me. So that's contact information. I know you guys, you're like, Chef Genevieve, this is old news. We've been here forever. I just want to make sure that we're all set up. So this week, you guys, we are talking creaming method, Italian buttercream with a flat coat of icing and a shell border. We are talking basic cake skills, basic cake decorating. Now the word basic is very misleading, because getting a flat coat of icing and a consistently piped shell border with a consistent creaming method cake on the interior is not as easy as the word basic makes it sound. But we really do have to walk before we run. And again, going back to having made some mistakes, I have tried many times to cut corners, to skip over the basics, because I wanted to get to the Food Network stuff. I wanted to get to the cake box stuff. I was so excited by all the beautiful and elaborate designs I was seeing that I didn't want to learn the flat coat of icing and the shell border. But I'm telling you, we've got to master this before we can move forward. Something that I didn't think too much about when it came to cake, again, because I think my love of cake really came from the Food Network, really came from watching food competitions, cake competitions. I didn't see a lot of cake in practical applications. I didn't see a lot of cake in the way that a baker is going to be able to produce this in mass quantities and make money. Maybe not even mass quantities, but just a lot. Make a lot of product in a week and be able to sell that, because most chefs do not have the luxury of working on one cake for 2 weeks and then turning it into a client. That is absolutely not the case. So this cake that we are learning this week, I call the money cake. To be able to frost a cake with a flat coat of icing, give it a consistently piped border. In week 3, we'll talk a little more about decorating with script, can make you so much money, you guys. Even if you don't see yourself in working with cakes in the future, cakes can be the thing that helps you make your money to invest in equipment, to start saving for whatever your dream is. Cakes can help you get there, even if they're not a part of that end goal.
Because can I just add something to that?
Absolutely.
As a cake decorator, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Chef Loretta Grant. I'm just hanging in the class today. I want to talk about cake. When I went to culinary school, cake still is my passion, because number one, you will never be without a job. You will always have an income, because number one, there's a birthday, a celebration every day of the year. And once you learn that craft of making celebration cakes and cutout cakes, and your imagination can just take you to a whole nother level that you just couldn't even imagine. And it's just learning those skills. And even today, I still take simple Wilton cake decorating classes, because I learn from others in that class that may have just picked it up. It's always nice to always continue to learn your craft, because it's always beneficial to you. And we see how cupcake bakeries and cake bakeries have taken off, especially on Food Network, and all the challenges that are coming through there, because they're paying for our skill and our craft. So keep that in mind, you guys.
Absolutely. Great advice. Great advice. And I'm the same way, you guys. One of the reasons I put that YouTube video document up is because I have learned so much from watching others, and from watching as many different others as possible, trying to find as many chefs as I could, whether it was in real life or online on YouTube, because everybody has a really different style. The medium that I work with most often, you guys, is royal icing. I'm a cookie decorator. Man, oh man, do I make some sugar cookies. Lots of sugar cookies, lots of royal icing. There is another lady, I live in a small town, so fortunately for me, I actually don't have a lot of cookie competition. And the one other lady who is a really fabulous cookie baker is my friend, and we work together as often as we possibly can. So that's really great. But we have 2 totally different physical styles of piping royal icing. While our products, our end result, look very similar, the way that we hold the piping bag, the speed, the consistency are a little bit different for both of us. So absolutely continue to explore and do outside research when it comes to cake making and decorating especially, because if you're finding something to be really challenging, there's probably another way that somebody's tried it that might work better for you. So there's absolutely, especially in this industry, always room to keep growing and keep learning.
And then also you have to make sure that when you're piping, you understand, like when you have, for instance, you have your pastry bag, everyone's hand temperature is not the same. So the two of us, myself and Chef Dodd, may be icing a cake. My hands are very cold, so I can hold a pastry bag much longer than someone else. Her hands may be hot. And
they are.
See? That's so funny. And her icing may need to be a little bit stiffer than mine. So you have to take that into account also.
Absolutely. So the things that we are bringing up right now, again, is why it's important to learn the basics before we move too far, right? You got to learn the basic skills, and then you can really start finding your style, finding your groove, what works best for you, what equipment works best for you. Equipment is going to be something we talk a lot about week after week. This week, one of the more expensive pieces of equipment that's on your inventory list is a cake plate, so that you can turn your cake and frost it. Here's what I will tell you about that cake plate. I have two. I have a nice quality one. It's the higher quality ones are weighted on the bottom. The bottom of it's really heavy so that it doesn't easily rock around on your countertop. That is the best piece of equipment when it comes to icing your cake. However, not necessary. I only very recently got that nice cake stand. I found it at a garage sale, thank the Lord. And but for years I was using a plastic one that wasn't weighted on the bottom at all. I think I got it at Michael's. It is tricky to use, but it got the job done for me. I think I maybe bought it for $29, and I think that was probably full price. You can probably use a coupon to get it 20% off or something. Michael's always has those coupons. I know that Hobby Lobby has them too. Now, I also know that times are tough. And if you're like, Chef, I don't have the $29 to spend on a cake plate, can I do it without? Yes, you can. One thing that you will be using is a cake board, right? It's a round piece of cardboard that you're going to put your cake on. This week, your cake round can be a little larger than your cake. So if you are making an 8-inch cake, you can use a 10-inch cake board or an 8-inch cake board. It doesn't have to be bigger. It can't be smaller though, so that's the one thing you want to be sure of. When we make our 2-tiered cake in week 6, we'll talk more about those cake rounds and when sizes are really important. But when you're working with just one tier, the cake round underneath, as long as it's at least the same size as the cake, is going to be fine. So with that cake round on your countertop, in your hand, on top of a really wide-angled bowl, you can turn it, you can make it work, getting creative. So that turntable, if you have any issues, reach out to me. I've got videos, I've got things to help you, because I too tried for years to get by without a turntable, because sometimes I can just be really stubborn, and I think that I can do anything and everything. But there'll be more when we talk about fondant in week 5. There are really, Wilton, I love Wilton. I have a ton of Wilton brand equipment, but there are also some things that you don't have to buy the name brand of that are much less expensive. So for example, a lot of my fondant tools are actually tools that I got from the clay section of the arts and crafts store. Very similar tips and edges, but I got them for a fraction of the cost because they weren't a fancy baking title. For coloring, for your luster dust is one of the most expensive ingredients, one of the most expensive things that I purchase for decorating. When it comes to gum paste flowers typically aren't eaten. While they usually are mostly edible, they still aren't typically eaten. And so I use, Chef Jeannie actually taught me this trick. I don't know if you guys have had the chance to meet her yet, but I use non-toxic pastels, and I just crush them into a powder, and I use that powder to color my gum paste flower instead of buying a $12 2-ounce jar of luster dust, because luster dust is just so super expensive. So we'll talk about equipment as we move forward, but there are definitely areas of cake making and decorating where you can get creative and find equipment that for a fraction of the cost that will still work just as effectively. This week, the equipment list also says 8-inch cake pan. 8-inch cake will be great, but you can absolutely do a smaller one if you would prefer to do a 6-inch. I actually think 6-inch cakes are much more manageable and also much more popular right now. It is the size of cake that I have ordered most frequently. It's cost effective. Most people their budget will work for a 6-inch cake. And nowadays, in the days of Instagram and social media and Facebook, I would say that it's our time to shine as bakers and pastry chefs because people want Instagrammable parties. So gone are the days of moms making their own cupcakes at home. I know plenty of moms still do, but I think there are also a lot of moms, dads, sisters, brothers out there who want to throw a really fantastic party for their friends, like the ones that they've seen on Instagram. So that means getting your cake made by a professional, getting your desserts made by a professional, but still doing it within a budget, right? It's your 5-year-old little sister's birthday. You're not going to spend $400 on a cake for your 5-year-old little sister's birthday, but you might spend $60. You might spend $45 on a cake for your 5-year-old little sister's birthday. So I think 6-inch cakes are right now the most popular and the thing most frequently ordered. So I also, again, think that it's a little easier to manage both the layers of cake, trimming them, as well as constructing it. So that's just something to consider. Any opinions on that, Chef Loretta?
Well, I think one of the most important things when you're making cakes is to make sure that they're flat.
Yes,
the first thing when you get a cake is you are looking at it. You don't want a cake that's slanted just the slightest. Make sure everything is even. I think that's one of the biggest things. And consistency. You learn tricks to hide if there's a mistake, or think about it. When you're transporting cakes, anything can happen. You can slide on the cake slide, anything can happen. So you need to make sure that it is presentable when you deliver that cake, because people are, that's what our cake decorating is about. It's about an experience. That's what hospitality is about, that memories, and that's what that cake is about. It's more than just butter, sugar, flour. It's more than that. We're giving an extension of our creativity to them every time we make a cake, and we will never make that same cake exactly the same.
Absolutely. In one of your video resources, you guys, that's something else that I, just so that you guys know and have a heads up, I know that everybody likes things a little bit differently, but in my live sessions, I try and avoid watching our class videos during this hour that we have, because those videos are available to you guys to watch the second the week starts. You have all week to watch them. So I like to pull up a few additional resources outside of that to show you guys, just to make sure that we're as well-rounded as possible. But as far as trimming your layers, there is a video both in the document that I made, the extra fun document, as well as a video listed under your resources. Let me share my page with you. So layer cake assembly is where you're going to learn about trimming your layers and putting them together. So I would say that this is one of the most common mistakes when people try and make a cake at home, a layered cake, without any experience or without having done a layered cake before. And it's that they forget to trim the top. So when a cake bakes, especially a creaming method cake, some cakes bake up a little differently. There's typically a dome at the top, right? So we have to trim that dome off. Not just of the layers that a cake is being stacked on top of, but even that top layer. In fact, what I like to do for the top layer is actually flip it over. So let's say I have 3 6-inch cakes. I've cut the dome off all 3 cakes, so they're all flat now. I've stacked one, put frosting, stacked the other, put my frosting. The last layer I'll flip over so that the crumb part, the part that was open where I cut, is sitting in the frosting, and the part that was in the pan, that was exposed to the pan, is on the top. That makes it that much easier for me to do my crumb coat, because the top of the cake is now a little bit more sealed in than had I left it with the exposed cut side up. So that's something that I do every single time, definitely helpful. You want to make sure that your cakes are also even all the way around. I know that if you use the same size cake pan, they should be, right? But sometimes stacking, especially I think that stacking is the part that I find more challenging, or challenging. I think it's going to be easier every time that I try and do it, and every time it's not. One of my cakes is always sticking out a little more than it should. So once you've got your cake stacked, what I like to do is take a cake board or cake round, just like what you've got on the bottom, and I set it on the top to put my hand on. And then I can take a knife and run it down the sides to make sure that my sides are even. Now, I don't have to do that often. The week 3 is probably a cake where you will do that. It's our chiffon method cake, and chiffon cake tends to deflate a little and get a little uneven on the sides. So that's a cake where you're probably going to be trimming the sides. But this creaming method cake, as long as you're baking in the same size cake pan, you really shouldn't have to trim the sides. Any questions so far? I'm going to pull up our creaming method recipe, and I don't want to dwell on it for too long because you guys are familiar with the creaming method all the way back to the beginning, right? Your spritz cookies. You guys know creaming method. What's the creaming method all about? What are we doing when we are mixing our butter and sugar? We're not just mixing them. What else are we doing?
Think about it.
Wendy's saying it. Go ahead, Wendy. Come on.
We incorporate air in it.
Absolutely. Incorporating air.
Very good.
More air gets and fluffy the cake or whatever's going to come out.
That's it. That's it. Thank you, Wendy.
Excellent.
So all about incorporating air, you guys. That's a big deal with our cake, right? We don't want our cake to come out. I think even more so with cakes than with cookies. You can tell if the product is dense, if the product has not been mixed properly. So let me get this pulled up. It is a yellow butter cake formula. However, I am fine with you guys doing any formula that you would like as long as it is creaming method. So it has to be a creaming method cake, but you may choose any flavor that you'd like. I'm perfectly fine with that. If you do it, no matter which flavor that you choose, make sure that in your narrative, in your reflection sheet, you tell me what the flavor is and what the ingredients are. All right, let's share. So this says bake at 350. I bake at 350 if I am going to give this person, this customer, their cake the next day. If I am baking any farther ahead of that, I bake at 325. It does take longer for my cakes to bake, but I find that it gives me a little more control, and I don't par bake them. They are baked all the way through, but I would describe them as just barely baked all the way through, like just to the point of baked through, and then I take them out of the oven, cool them, wrap them, store them in the refrigerator. Baking off your layers, we'll talk about this a lot in week 4 as well, is a step of these big projects that can absolutely be done ahead of time. So for your cake this week, you guys, I know that all of you are busy. You all have a million other things that you've got going on. You can bake your layers off, let's say tomorrow or Friday. You can bake your layers off, wrap them individually with saran wrap once they're cooled, and you can put them in the fridge. Then the next day you can trim them and make your buttercream, and then the next day you can construct your cake. You can finish putting it together. So this big project can absolutely be broken down into really manageable chunks. However, if you wait, it doesn't really work the reverse way. If you wait until Tuesday to finish this project, I think that it will cause you stress, and you will feel flustered. You will feel challenged by things like getting the crumb coat on because your cake might still be a little warm when you try and do it. It might fall apart when you try and cut it if you're rushing through. Again, you guys, I have made that mistake hundreds of times, not leaving myself enough time to make a big project like this. So please reach out to me if you have questions about production timeline. I'm happy to help you break it up into smaller pieces. But with this class, again, more than any other class that you've had, I recommend not waiting until the last minute. Starting at least 36 hours before, I would say, is going to set you up for success. Not leaving any less time than that to start. So you're going to...
Have they made butter cake before? Cakes with the creaming method before?
I don't believe that. Some students have, for sure, but they learned the creaming method making spritz cookies.
Okay, because I just wanted to add that when you're creaming for a cake, don't rush the process. Because if you say, okay, I'm going to cream in a minute and it's ready, no. Take your time, make sure the color is right, the consistency is right, and make sure you're scraping the bottom of the bowl. Because there's going to be sugar chunks in there if you're not scraping the bottom of that bowl. And you'll see that in your end product.
The sound got a little choppy there, but what she said, what Chef Loretta said, and such important advice, you guys, scrape the bowl. So after your initial mixing of your butter and sugar, stop. Once you feel like they're a little bit combined, turn off the mixer, scrape down the sides of your bowl, start it back up again. You're going to learn this with our buttercream too, especially American buttercream. The mixer is not that, things might look mixed, but that does not mean that the mixing process is complete. And I see that a lot with the creaming method, is mixing the two together until they've sort of combined, but not mixing for long enough for that butter to shift to a light pale color, fluffy in consistency. You will notice it go from looking grainy to smooth, and it will really start to cover the sides of your bowl. The more that you mix it, the more that you cream it, it's going to climb up the sides of that mixing bowl. It's going to get pale in color, pillowy in consistency, and grow in volume. It will look like a larger mass than it did when you started mixing because we've incorporated air, right? Like our meringue, how we end up with such a higher volume at the end after we've mixed. So looking at our instructions here, creaming your butter and sugar, slowly adding your eggs. Remember, room temperature butter, room temperature eggs. Your eggs, you guys, add them slowly. I say it so frequently. I mix whenever, even if it just has 2 eggs or 1 egg even, in my measuring cup, whisk that egg up. Mix the egg white and mix the egg yolk really nice. That makes it much easier for me to pour small increments of egg in. If you leave the eggs whole, 1 whole egg is just going to plop in at a time, and that might be too much liquid to start. Your butter and sugar can only absorb so much moisture at a time. So incorporating your eggs slowly, again, scraping the bowl in between every addition of egg. You want to make sure that that moisture is being evenly dispersed between your fat and sugar. Once you've added go ahead, Chef.
And you will know if you add the eggs too quickly because the mixture will look broken.
Curdled, yep, it will look lumpy. You can feel it on the mixing bowl. The mixing bowl will feel cold, so because your butter's starting to chill back up. So it's pretty easy to tell if you've added too much moisture or your eggs were too cold. Alrighty, let's see here. So I have a fun trivia question for you guys. I know that you have seen time and time again the instruction to sift your flour. Does anybody know the origin of sifting your flour, or one of the reasons that that technique came to be? Why did that start? Anybody? Crickets? Well, a long time ago, you guys, the wheat that we grew, its shells would fall off and scatter, and it's described as wild wheat. And so when it grows in nature, it's not necessarily farmed in the same way that a wheat farm would be. That's a much more controlled area. We've also managed through science to create a wheat strain that stays intact no matter how windy it is. So its shell stays on, which makes it easier to get to the insides, the good stuff, to mill that wheat. But back in the day, we didn't have that fancy strain of wheat. So shells were flying everywhere, parts of wheat that aren't necessarily meant for your bread or for your flour. Were everywhere bugs. In order to harvest the wheat, there were insects everywhere. Times were different. So you had to sift your flour. Once you ground that wheat up, you had to sift it because you had to get parts of the shell out of there. You had to get bugs out of there. There was plenty of stuff in that wheat that you didn't want in there. That's where that technique started years and years and years and years and years and years and years ago. Oh my gosh, I can't even describe to you how long humans have been eating bread, you guys, but have been eating and using wheat too, no less. So I will tell you that I think sifting your dry ingredients is a little less important now, a little less important, but still important. The biggest reason that I sift my dry ingredients is because it helps me to make sure that my chemical leavener is more evenly dispersed. My salt is more evenly dispersed. I have many times taken a bite of a baked good and went, man, I just got a metallic-y taste in my mouth, or man, that was a little saltier than a muffin usually is. And that's usually because a pocket of salt or a pocket of chemical leavener didn't get evenly mixed in enough. So sifting together your dry ingredients is, I would argue, a quick and efficient way to make sure that they're getting more evenly dispersed. It's also going to make the mixing process easier because you're going to have less lumps that you have to beat out of your batter once you pour your dry ingredients in. So that was my fun trivia fact about sifting your flour. This recipe says alternate. Let me share again. Alternate your dry and your wet. Start with 1/3 of the dries, half of the wets, repeating, and end with dry. So you should be ending with your dry ingredients, okay? It says do not overmix. I don't want you guys to be too worried about this, okay? I know that we talked a lot about tunneling when you made your muffins, when we talked about quick breads, but with this amount of batter and with this cake, I think that after you've incorporated all of your ingredients at a medium speed, you could probably mix this for 2 to 5 minutes without over-mixing it. I like to mix at a medium speed, maybe even medium high, for about 1 minute to 2 minutes after I've got everything in. That helps me make sure that my batter is just fully and well combined. Again, I scrape my bowl before I do that, making sure one last time, especially my mixer. If you have a KitchenAid, I'm not sure about other brands, my mixing bowl, to me, it drives me nuts because I'm like, they know what we're using these mixing bowls for, but the mixing bowl at the bottom has like a little knuckle, and then it's kind of like indented, and so much sugar and butter gets stuck in that tiny little indent in my mixing bowl, and the only way to get it out is to scrape the bowl. So you got to reach down all the way to the bottom there, make sure you're getting that sugar and butter out of that little indent. But after all of your ingredients, you can mix for a couple of minutes without it over mixing. With cakes, layered cakes like this, I think one of the reasons you see why I've seen big tunnels before in layers is because when you pour the batter from whatever mixing bowl to your cake pans, we are also incorporating air. That movement is incorporating air to our product in ways that we might not want, creating air bubbles in areas that we don't want. So once you've added your batter to your pan, you can use your scale for this. So what you would do is you would weigh your bowl of batter, right? You're gonna divide that. You can put a clean bowl, tear it, pour your batter in, weigh that, divide that by 3 or however many layers you want. The minimum is 2. So your cake only has to be 2 layers, but I recommend 3. Excuse me. So you can use your scale to then divide that by however many layers that you need. I use a different method because I'm not trying to scrape my batter from one bowl to another bowl to a third bowl. I use the scoop method. So I have on my wall of tools, I have my scoops going up in sizes. And when I write a recipe, I describe based on my scoop sizes how many go in the pan. So for example, my chocolate cake has a specific scoop size and it needs 6 scoops for the pan. My creaming method vanilla cake needs 4 scoops and uses a different size scoop. So I have my own crazy scoop method that I've crafted. Just like we said in the beginning, all chefs do things differently. But starting out, the scale is the way to do it most accurately. So as far as accuracy, the scale will really help you make sure that your layers are going to be the same size, making sure you weigh each pan before you go into the oven. So something else that I think I have in previous courses forgotten to mention, parchment paper, parchment paper, parchment paper. One of my jobs, at my first internship I ever had, you guys, was cutting out stinking parchment circles for days. Holy moly, they made, this bakery made hundreds and hundreds of cakes a week. So I really do think my first 3 days I just sat there and cut out parchment circles until my eyes bled. And it was okay though, because I got to learn how to make lots of good, I got to use those parchment circles and learn how to make cakes. But with your cake pan, before you fill it, I guess even after you fill it, it's not a big deal, but you can set that cake pan on your parchment with a pencil or a pen, trace it. Whatever side has the pencil or pen on it, make sure you turn it upside down so that that's touching the pan and not your cake batter, right? We don't want that pen on our product. But the round of parchment should be the same, should fit very nicely into your pan. It should not be coming up the sides, folded over. You want to trim it so it's a nice circle. You want to grease underneath, and then I like to even grease on top of the parchment a little so that it peels off easily off my cake once it's cooled. So I grease the sides pretty heavily, and you don't want to see any grease pooling up, but you do want it to be well greased. Parchment circle, a little more grease. Once you've got your batter in, tap your pans on the countertop, you guys. You're going to take it with 2 hands, holding the lips, and firmly 3 or 4 times, maybe not even that many times if you're stronger than me. I have no upper body strength, but tapping your cake pan on the counter a few times, you're going to see bubbles pop at the top, and that's what you want. We're getting rid of some air bubbles that occurred when we transferred the batter from the mixing bowl to the baking pans. If you cut open your layers and you see really big pockets everywhere, those are mostly air bubbles that we could have popped before going into the oven, not necessarily tunneling from over mixing. So keep that in mind. Few firm taps. That'll be the same for next week. For our chiffon cake, it will not be. We are not going to tap our chiffon cake batter on the countertop. All right, any questions about creaming method, you guys? I want to move on to Italian buttercream. We're already getting short on time, and Italian buttercream is the really new thing for you this week. Also, I'm not sure if you guys know, but I can't see the chat when I'm talking. So if I missed any questions, you can, of course, message them. You can always raise your hand and ask aloud, or you can send it to me privately later after class, and I will do whatever I can to answer it. But just nobody think that I'm ignoring you down in the chat. Can you use PAM, and do you flour the pan? You can use PAM. You do not need to flour the pan. Flouring your pan and greasing your pan usually results in a product that's pretty burned and browned around the edges. Even if it's baked through nicely on the center, adds a little too much color on the sides of our cake that's not necessary. So just grease. My favorite product is called Baker's Joy. It's in the same exact area as the PAM and everything. I'm pretty sure same ballpark price, might even be a little expensive because it's not necessarily like a name brand. I don't know why Baker's Joy is my favorite, other than it was the one I used at when I did my externship after I graduated pastry school, and it has worked for me every time. I've never had an issue with my Baker's Joy, so I'm a creature of habit. And Teresa said, what size pans again and how many? So 8-inch and 6-inch are the 2 that I would recommend. You only really need 1 of each. However, having multiples of each can speed things up for you big time. So for example, if you were making a 3 or a 6-inch cake this week and you had 3 6-inch cake pans, you could make and bake all 3 layers at once. Whereas if you only have 1 pan, you have to wait for it to bake, cool, fill that pan again. So that's up to you. That's very doable. Again, something I did for a long time. For example, my 12-inch pan. I have one. 12-inch pans are expensive. That's a big old whopping pan. I have one 12-inch pan, and that's when I have to make more than one layer, that's what I got to do. I got to bake one off, let it cool, and bake another. So again, think about where you see yourself moving forward and where you see yourself investing in equipment. And you can always reach out to me too for suggestions and advice on that sort of thing. Francine said, isn't Baker's Joy oil and flour? So the Baker's Joy that I use is a spray, and it might say oil and flour in it, but it is definitely all a liquid grease. There's no part of it that's dry.
Because if you use the spray and the flour, sometimes you get cakey, like it's like a chalky film almost that you can get when you take it out of the cake pan. So you never want to really combine those two together, because it'll be like you almost have to shave it off sometimes. So you want to use one or the other. I think using Pam or Baker's Joy, any one of those sprays is perfectly fine if you're not using the parchment circles.
Jean asked, is it okay for the batter to sit for a little? And the answer is yes. You can let this batter sit for a little bit, but remember, I don't know, when we talked about quick breads and chemical leaveners, one of the characteristics of a chemical leavener is that once it hits that liquid, once that liquid hits it, once they combine, it immediately starts activating, right? And so if we allow our batter to sit for too long, our chemical leavener isn't going to be as active and as powerful, and you're not going to see the same rise out of your product. Now, that being said, I have made batter and left it in the fridge for 3 to 5 days and baked cakes with it that still worked just fine. So I'm not saying you have to use it within hours, but it's also not necessarily something that keeps for a long time. Or you wouldn't want to hold on to this batter for more than a week for it to produce a high quality product.
What if you bake in the pan, like you only have one 6-inch pan? So you bake, let it cool, and then is it okay to let the batter wait?
Absolutely. Totally fine. Yep.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Francine said, is this formula enough to make 3 6-inch cakes? Yes. If you're, I think that it is. They might be thinner layers, which is totally fine. I recommend maybe doing 1/4 of the recipe extra, just so that if you want beefier layers, you have them. Yeah, I would say 1/4 to 1/2 of the recipe more would give you more than enough. The frosting recipe, the Italian buttercream formula, is more than enough frosting. You'll have plenty of frosting to do a crumb coat and your exterior. So now let's talk Italian buttercream. Make sure you guys check out the video. Okay, I've got a couple listed. There's our Italian buttercream video here. Underneath it, and I want to pull this up right now, is a video about fixing broken Italian buttercream. So you guys are familiar with Italian meringue, right? Yes. You made Italian meringue for your gluten-free chocolate cake in week 3 of BK201, yes. So we are heating our sugar, right? Cooking our sugar, pouring into our egg whites, whipping until we get to that beautiful marshmallow fluff, solid white, satiny, shiny consistency, right? So a properly done stiff peak meringue should not look foamy, shouldn't be too liquidy. It again is that thick marshmallow fluff consistency. An Italian buttercream is creating that meringue, making our Italian meringue, pouring our sugar in, whipping it up to marshmallow fluff, and then adding very small pieces of cubed room temperature butter, slowly, 1 piece at a time. As that slowly incorporates, you're going to notice that marshmallow fluff consistency turning to this beautifully big, fluffy, smooth, shiny buttercream. Now, a couple of things here. If your butter is too cold, if your butter chunks are too large, if your meringue was still too hot, it's going to look messy. You're going to be like, Chef, I'm panicking. My buttercream looks like soup, or it looks like so lumpy, I can't figure it out, don't worry. If your meringue is too hot and you add room temperature butter, you will get soup. It will melt your butter too quickly. You can save that. It's a process. It's a matter of chilling it, mixing it, but it takes a long time. And the goal, if you can avoid that at all costs, that you want to, because chilling it and then taking it back out to refresh it, it's not going to be ready immediately. We have to, again, sort of bring it back down to the room temperature. We have to get both ingredients, the meringue and the butter, to room temperature. So that's the challenge when one is too hot or too cold. So the temperature test that you can do for your meringue is touching the bowl, you guys. After you've mixed your meringue, you've poured your sugar in, let it cool for a little bit, touch the bowl. If it's easy to handle, nice to touch, you're good to go. If it is still warm, it's too hot. Don't add your butter yet, okay? Let that bowl, cool down completely before you start adding your butter. Your butter should be room temperature. I recommend not trying to bring cold butter to room temperature in the microwave. It always ends up getting a little too soft, a little too runny. So take your butter out the night before, leave it on the counter. It's that consistency where you press into it and you see your fingertip. You push into it. It makes a little concave dent, but it doesn't collapse or mush or totally fall apart, right? You should still be able to cut it, to cube it, so soft enough that it holds its shape when you're applying your knife. It's a lot of butter, and you're going to think to yourself, man, I have to sit here and throw each one of these cubes in one at a time? And the answer is yes. But I will tell you, it makes such a beautiful product. People love it. People go bananas for it. Now, in our field guide this week, let me pull that up first. Let me see here. I've got some tips about Italian buttercream. And one of them is a warning about the taste. Because a lot of us, I know for me, I grew up in a small town where every cake that I ever had from ages 0 to 21 came from the grocery store. Albertsons or City Market, it was a grocery store cake. I had never had anything else. So that meant most of the frosting I had ever tried was Crisco and powdered sugar. So the first time I tried Italian buttercream, I was like, man, that is rich frosting. And you guys will probably feel the same. You will think, man, this is super, super buttery frosting. And it is. But I think that it is that buttery, rich flavor that makes it more elevated. And people, again, are huge, huge fans of it. Some people are not. You'll have plenty of that with your customers. But some people just find the Italian buttercream so much more luxurious. So right here, you'll notice we'll have a strong buttery flavor, less sweet than what you're accustomed to. At most, I would say you could reduce the butter by 20%, 25%, but that's pushing it because you don't want a product that's too much meringue and not enough buttercream. So 20, 25%, and that's only because some people really just find the butter taste to be unbearable. I love butter. You guys know that. My email tagline is with appreciation and butter. Butter's my jam. I could eat it all. I could eat it by itself. I love butter. But if you are a little nervous about it tasting a little too rich, you might consider pulling back on the butter ever so slightly. There's a few other helpful hints in this field guide, which is available to you at the very top of our week 1. So when you look at week 1, it's this very first resource. So you can walk through that slideshow, check out those helpful tips. All right, I want to pull up, I know I promised you guys I wouldn't do this, but I am going to pull up the Italian buttercream video. I'm not going to play the sound. Let me stop my share and pull it up for us here.
But I will tell you guys, when you do make this buttercream, it is so easy to work with.
Yeah.
It is just so free-flowing. You're going to absolutely love it.
So check out this bowl of butter that Chef Anne's got here. Lots of butter, right? That is a mounding bowl of cubed butter. So when you read the formula and you're like, Chef, this is a lot of butter. Is that right? My answer is going to be, yes, it is. It is a lot of butter, and that is correct. That is the correct amount of butter in this formula. So also, you guys, this is not the week to experiment with margarine. Now, if you have special dietary issues, please reach out to me. I always want to work with you guys on that sort of thing, but butter is the way to go. Margarine would have a terribly strong taste, and it would not be what you want. So she's cooking her sugar to make her meringue. Let's skip ahead a little bit here. She's whipped her egg whites up a little bit first before pouring in her hot sugar. There we go. So after she gets to this stage, right, our marshmallow fluff, solid white, satiny, shiny stage, she's going to let this cool. TV magic, it might not look like she lets it cool because she's in a fancy studio, but I promise she let that bowl cool down before she started adding her butter, okay? So, and it might take longer than a couple of minutes. It might be 10, 15 minutes before your meringue cools down enough, and that's okay. She's gonna pop it back on. I would describe this as a medium-high speed. If your mixer is all the way up, you're gonna have butter chunks like flying out and swatting you in the face. But you do want it pretty high to start getting that butter incorporated. And you can see that Chef Ann is truly 1 to 2 cubes at a time throwing them in. Carefully looking at her meringue as she adds them, making sure that it's not separating. You can see the buttercream getting fluffier, getting larger, growing in volume. You can also see it shifting in color. So it went from that bright white meringue to sort of a soft white beige, a little more of a yellowish hue. Now, as you continue to mix, that hue will brighten up again, but it will never be as bright white as the meringue was. It will always have a slight beigeish hue. Chef Ann's gonna add her vanilla here at the end. Let me pull, there we go. So you can see it is a thick product. It's not soupy, really stuck onto her whisk here. And like Chef Loretta said, and this is absolutely true, it flows beautifully because it's oily. It's an oily frosting. It glides right out of your piping bag. Your tools, when you're smoothing it out, I think that this frosting is the easiest of the three to get, or I mean, I guess Swiss is pretty similar, but to get a smooth coat of icing. Much easier than American buttercream, which is something that took me far too long to learn. I tried to decorate so many cakes with American buttercream, and American buttercream has its place. I use American buttercream for buttercream flowers, for buttercream script, for buttercream details like your shell border. This week your shell border is Italian buttercream as well, but in week 3, you'll do a Swiss buttercream and an American, and you guys can do a little experimenting with your piping skills to see which you prefer when it comes to detail work. Any questions about Italian buttercream? You guys, well, I'm gonna pull up this little video because I find don't do this sometimes just as helpful as do this. So I'm gonna pull up a no-no video just for some things to be looking out for, okay? Let's see where I put that. Okay. I'm gonna turn the sound off. So she is adding huge chunks of butter here. So that's a problem, adding too much butter at once. Let me fast forward a little bit here. And when you add too much butter at once, you're gonna get a product that looks grainy and a little loose, a little soupy, something like this, almost like mashed potato-y kind of. And it should certainly not be that consistency. It should be smoother. Now, sometimes it's just a matter of needing to heat this up a little bit. Maybe your butter was still a little tiny bit cold. So this is the double boiler method, which most of you have a pot at home that you can simmer water, put this over. The goal is not to melt the product. She's adding liquid, that's not necessary. Not to melt it all, but to melt it a little bit. You're heating up that butter a little bit. And then when you remix it, you're going to be able to get this smooth, creamy consistency. another method, the one that I most frequently use because I have the equipment to do so, is I torch my bowl. So I use my torch. If I notice my Italian buttercream is maybe looking a little lumpy or a little stiff because my butter was too cold, I torch the bowl gently, heat up the sides of the bowl as it's mixing. And then as that happens, slowly but surely, it comes together and smooths out. So that video, I know that I jumped through it, but it's on our class page. I put it under our resources already. So I would give that video a look as well, just because there's really helpful tips about fixing a broken Italian buttercream. It's definitely doable. So I don't want anybody to panic if something happens during their buttercream production. We're going to be able to fix it. Now, I've got just a few more things. We're at the very tail end of our class, and I hate pushing over. I want to respect your guys' time. So I just want to show you a few other resources that are available to you specific to this week, okay? So right here is just a photo. If you click on this link, it will just take you to a larger version of this photo. And it says, this is what your cake should look like this week. This is what I am expecting to see, okay? Now it can be a little shorter than this, right? Because I said a minimum of 2 layers. I would describe this is probably 3, maybe 4 layers if they're thin layers, because there's also frosting in between each layer, which is an expectation. You will need to crumb coat your cake. That is something that that gets missed often. But remember, a thin layer of frosting on your cake first, putting it in the fridge to chill, and then putting on a generous second coat of frosting. If you do not do a crumb coat, you will see crumbs in your exterior, and it will be super, almost near impossible to get a beautifully smooth coat without thinning it too much in some areas, without getting it to be see-through, or without it being still too textured in some areas. So a crumb coat, tidy crumb coat, which just means a thin layer of frosting. It's okay if you see through it. Just trapping those crumbs in, chilling it. Having a chilled crumb coat is going to give you a nice firm surface to frost on, which again will help you smooth out the sides and the top. This is a shell border. I would describe this as consistent with the size star tip that you all got in your kits. So you can expect to see a border similar of this size if you are using the star tip that you received in your kit. If you have other sizes that you would rather use, I'm perfectly fine with that, but I do want to see a specific shell border. So I don't want to see beads, I don't want to see stars or Russian flower tips yet. I want to see a shell border. Remember, we're walking before we run. One of the videos I posted in that cool video resource page is a bunch of different examples of how to elevate a shell border, how to use the shell border technique and make even more fancy, intricate borders. So trust me that there is absolutely value in learning this skill, this basic skill of the shell border. Then the last thing I want to show you guys is the assignment requirements. So we're all on the same page. So for, as always, self-ID, mise en place, and sanitation, right? I know that bleach and things are super hard to come by. Any kitchen safe cleaning product is perfectly fine by me. Whatever you're using to sanitize your kitchen, take a picture of it for me. That works for me. I haven't been able to find bleach on my shelves for weeks, so I totally get it. Mise en place and self-ID. For your cake, your fat and sugar creamed together properly. This is probably the most important picture to me that I will be looking for, okay? I really want to see those 2 things creamed properly. I need to see after your eggs have been added, but before the rest of your ingredients, because I want to see that those eggs were the right temp and that we added them slowly. Now it says scaled batter in prepared pans. I don't need to see it on the scale. I just need to see your pans filled with batter before they've gone into the oven. And then cooled and trimmed, cut into layers. For your buttercream, I want to see your egg whites in the bowl. I want to see your butter prepped. So I want to see a picture of your cubed butter in a bowl. Your sugar once it's reached the right temperature. Your meringue after you've poured that sugar into your egg whites. And then your finished buttercream after you've finished adding your butter pieces to that meringue. So cake layered with Italian buttercream filling. All I'm looking for here is at least a picture showing me that you've got frosting in between your layers. So however you want to show me that, that's fine. I just need to see that that frosting made it in between those layers before it got crumb coated. Then your cake, your crumb coated cake, then your cake with its final coating and its borders on, and then again, a really important one, you guys, a slice of your final product. I know that hurts sometimes. I've definitely felt like a twang in my heart when I've had to cut into a cake that I've worked so hard on. But I want you to enjoy your cakes. First of all, I want your friends and family to enjoy them. But I also want to see the inside to see that the layers of cake are consistent in size. We've got an appropriate amount of frosting on the interior, that the cakes are baked all the way through. So remember that those required photos are really what I base my grading on. I'm not expecting to see perfection. I have been baking cakes for 8 years, and I still have a hard time getting a flat coat of icing. If I'm being totally honest with you guys, I avoid it. It's challenging. So I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not looking for a cake as beautifully perfect and straight as that one that I just showed you, but I am looking to see that you guys understand the methods and the techniques, and that you understand them well enough to keep practicing them on your own without me. So as long as you guys show me that, and which is absolutely will be represented by those required photos, you're gonna be good to go. All right, we're 5 minutes over. I don't want to hold you guys any longer. I want to thank Chef Loretta for joining us and for giving us some awesome tips and advice tonight. You guys were quiet tonight, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to make you talk before the 6 weeks is over. Any last questions for me before? Oh, Sheena said, do you need to keep it all white? I would like for your cake to be white this week. Don't worry, we're gonna jump into color, we're gonna jump into flowers, to decorations, scripts, we're gonna get there. So I would like your cake to be white. Reach out to me if you're like, Chef, I've been making cakes for forever, I need a challenge. Reach out to me and I'll work with you. I'll give you something a little more challenging to work on, okay? Great question.
I've been answering some of them.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. So appreciated.
Yeah, and then I just made a note to everyone that be aware that the icing, it has a very high butter content, so it's going to be very soft, like I talked about in the beginning, the temperature of your hands when you're piping. Just be aware of that.
If you store your frosting, if you make your frosting ahead of time and store it in the fridge, that's fine. Well, if you're only waiting 1 day and your kitchen isn't too hot, I would just store it in an airtight container on your countertop. But if you have to store it for a little longer, or maybe you do live in a really hot area, you can store it in the fridge. When you refresh it, when you take it back out to use, not only, again, I mentioned this before about fixing your buttercream, but not only do you have to remix it, you want to make sure it's coming back to the right temperature, that it's a little closer to room temperature. You don't want it to be too cold. It might almost look like it's separating at first when it's still really cold, but as it warms up, it will come back together, I promise you. All right, you guys. Thank you for coming. Please reach out to me with any questions, concerns. I can't wait to check out your cakes, and we're gonna have fun.